Nora pulled her coat tighter against the chilly evening wind. At 5 feet 4 inches with a slender build, she often felt small against the weight of the world. Her jeans were worn and her coat old and faded, but she carried herself with quiet determination. Her 7-year-old son, Ethan, skipped beside her, his energy a sharp contrast to her weariness. Ethan had a lean but strong body that seemed built for movement. "Mom, can we just look? We don't have to get one. I promise." Ethan pleaded, tugging her toward the small animal shelter at the corner of their neighborhood. Nora hesitated, looking at the glowing sign above the door. "Ethan, we can't afford a dog. They're expensive, and they need a lot of care." "I know, Mom. I just want to see. Please." He tilted his head up, his wide eyes filled with hope. With a sigh, she gave in. "Okay, just for a minute. But no promises, all right?" The shelter was warm inside, a stark contrast to the biting wind outside. The smell of animals and cleaning supplies hit her nose as they entered. Rows of kennels lined the walls, each one holding a hopeful pair of eyes or a wagging tail. Ethan let go of her hand and ran ahead, peering into each kennel. Nora followed more slowly, her tired feet dragging across the floor. Then Ethan stopped suddenly, his eyes lighting up. "Mom, come here. Look at him." Nora approached the kennel he was pointing at and froze. Inside was a magnificent German Shepherd, large and powerful, yet somehow calm and approachable. His sleek black and tan coat shone under the dim shelter lights, and his pointed ears stood tall, giving him a regal appearance. But it was his eyes that held her attention, deep brown, intelligent, and soft, as if he could see right through her. "His name's Buddy," Ethan read from the card on the kennel. "He's so cool. Can I pet him, Mom? Please." Nora glanced at the shelter worker nearby, who nodded. "He's friendly. Go ahead." Ethan crouched down, his small hand trembling with excitement as he reached through the bars. Buddy leaned forward, sniffed at Ethan's fingers, and gave them a gentle lick. "He likes me," Ethan exclaimed, his laughter filling the room. His blue eyes sparkled with pure joy, his rosy cheeks lifting into a wide grin. Nora couldn't help but smile. The sight of her son, so happy, eased some of the tension in her chest. Buddy wagged his tail slowly, leaning against the kennel bars as if he, too, longed for connection. "He's beautiful," Nora murmured. The shelter worker stepped closer. "He's special. Very smart, very calm. He's great with kids, too. He just needs a home." Nora bit her lip, her gaze shifting between Ethan and Buddy. A dog? How could she possibly afford this? But then she saw the way Buddy looked at her, his warm eyes full of understanding, and she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Mom, can we take him? Please." Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts, filled with so much hope it made her chest ache. She sighed deeply. "Okay, but you'll have to help take care of him, Ethan. No complaining when it gets hard." Ethan's face lit up, and he threw his arms around her waist. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll help." Buddy was brought out, his graceful movements betraying his strength. As Ethan held the leash, Nora couldn't help but notice how gentle Buddy was, his large frame walking calmly beside the small boy. Walking home, Nora watched them together. Ethan chatted away, his voice animated as Buddy wagged his tail in response. Despite her exhaustion, Nora felt lighter, as though the heavy weight of her responsibilities had shifted just a little. For the first time in a long time, she dared to believe that things might get better. The apartment felt different now. For as long as Nora could remember, their tiny two-bedroom home had been quiet, too quiet. But ever since Buddy arrived, the space seemed warmer, livelier. Buddy, with his sleek black and tan coat and calm manner, had settled into their lives as though he had always been there. He quickly found his favorite spot by the window, where the sunlight streamed in during the mornings. From there, he watched the world go by, his pointed ears twitching at the sounds of the street below. "Buddy's watching for bad guys," Ethan declared one evening, as he sat cross-legged on the floor next to the dog. Nora, folding laundry nearby, smiled. "Is he now? I feel safer already." Ethan giggled, leaning into Buddy's side. The German Shepherd wagged his tail lazily, turning to nuzzle the boy's hair. In the days since Buddy's arrival, Ethan's laughter had filled the apartment more often. He no longer rushed through homework just to escape into video games. Instead, he spent hours talking to Buddy, brushing his coat, or playing fetch with a worn tennis ball they'd found in the back of a closet. But tonight, something was different. As Ethan stroked Buddy's fur, his usually cheerful face turned serious. "Mom," he said softly, not looking up. Nora replied, folding the last shirt and placing it in a pile. "Why don't the other kids like me?" The question hit her like a punch to the gut. She walked over and knelt beside him, her hazel eyes searching his. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Ethan shrugged, his small shoulders hunched. "At school, some of the kids say mean stuff. They call me names." He looked down at Buddy, his fingers gripping the dog's fur tightly. "It's okay, though. I don't care." But Nora could see he did care. The way his blue eyes shimmered, the way his lips pressed together to stop them from trembling, it broke her heart. Before she could respond, Buddy shifted. The big dog leaned into Ethan, resting his head on the boy's lap. It was a simple gesture, but it seemed to say, "I'm here. I've got you." Ethan smiled faintly and scratched behind Buddy's ears. "See? Buddy likes me. He doesn't care what anyone says." Nora swallowed the lump in her throat. "Buddy's smart. He knows you're special, Ethan. And I do too. Those kids? They don't matter. You're kind, you're brave, and you're everything they're not." Ethan leaned his head against Buddy's. "Do you think they'll ever stop?" "They will," Nora said firmly, brushing his hair out of his eyes. "And until then, Buddy and I will always be here for you." Buddy let out a soft huff, almost as if he agreed. Over the next few days, Nora began to notice just how attuned Buddy was to their emotions. On mornings when she woke up feeling particularly drained, Buddy would sit by her side, his warm eyes watching her as if to say, "You're not alone." One evening, after a grueling double shift, she collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands. Her thoughts raced: bills, work, and Ethan's school fees. The weight felt unbearable. Buddy patted over, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood floor. Without hesitation, he rested his head on her lap, his warm brown eyes meeting hers. "Hey, Buddy," she whispered, running her fingers through his soft fur. "You're a good boy. You know that?" His tail wagged gently, and for the first time that day, Nora felt the tightness in her chest ease. Ethan came out of his room a few minutes later, holding a piece of paper. "Mom, look, I drew you and Buddy." She smiled, taking the drawing. It was a simple crayon sketch. Her, Ethan, and Buddy standing under a big, yellow sun. She noticed the wide smiles on their faces. It wasn't just a drawing. It was how Ethan saw their little family now. "That's beautiful, Ethan," she said, pulling him close for a hug. "You're so talented." As Ethan grinned and ran back to his room, Buddy shifted closer to Nora, his warmth radiating through her. The days were still hard, and the struggles hadn't disappeared. But with Buddy there, everything felt a little brighter. He wasn't just a dog. He was family, and somehow, he made their small apartment feel like home. Nora noticed it the first time she gave Buddy a bath. As she ran the washcloth over his sleek black and tan coat, her fingers brushed against a faint, jagged scar along his side. Her heart clenched. What had happened to him before he ended up at the shelter? Buddy didn't flinch, but there was a flicker in his warm brown eyes. Something guarded. Nora didn't push him, instead murmuring, "You've been through a lot, haven't you, boy?" Buddy's tail wagged slightly, but his gaze seemed distant. Over the next few weeks, more clues surfaced. Loud noises, like car backfires or shouting from the street below, made Buddy tense up. He would freeze, his pointed ears twitching, his body coiled as if ready for action. Yet he never showed aggression, just a deep focus that reminded Nora of a soldier standing at attention. It was during a routine vet visit that more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Dr. Patel, their gentle, soft-spoken vet, ran her hands over Buddy during the checkup. "He's in great shape," she said, scratching under Buddy's chin. "But this scar here, and his alert behavior, it's possible he was a working dog." "A working dog?" Nora asked, surprised. Dr. Patel nodded. "German Shepherds are often used in police work, search and rescue. even military roles. The way he carries himself, so calm and observant, he's been trained. I'd bet on it. Ethan's eyes widened. Buddy was a police dog? Like the ones in movies? Dr. Patel giggled. Maybe. Or maybe he was trained for something else. Hard to say without knowing his full history. On the walk home, Ethan was buzzing with excitement. Mom, do you think Buddy saved people? Like pulled them out of burning buildings or found missing kids? Nora smiled at his enthusiasm. Maybe. Or maybe he just kept someone company, like he does for us. Ethan crouched down to ruffle Buddy's ears. You're a hero, aren't you, Buddy? A real-life hero. Buddy licked Ethan's face, his tail wagging. But as they walked, Nora couldn't shake the thought of his scar and his tense reactions. What had Buddy gone through before finding them? That night, as Ethan drew pictures of Buddy as a superhero, complete with a cape and badge, Nora sat on the couch, deep in thought. She glanced at Buddy, who was lying at her feet, his eyes watching her, as if sensing her unease. We'll figure it out, boy, she said softly. Whatever your story is, you're safe now. Buddy let out a soft huff, resting his head on her feet. Whatever his past, Nora knew one thing for sure. He belonged with them now. The night started like any other. Nora tucked Ethan into bed, his sandy blonde hair falling into his eyes as he sleepily hugged Buddy goodnight. You're the best dog ever, Buddy, Ethan mumbled, his voice heavy with sleep. Buddy wagged his tail, giving the boy's cheek a gentle lick before settling down on the floor beside the bed. Nora smiled, pulling the blanket up to Ethan's chin. Good night, sweetie. With the apartment quiet and still, Nora finally let herself relax. She sank into the couch, her legs stretched out, and closed her eyes. The weight of the day began to lift as she drifted towards sleep. But then, Buddy's bark shattered the silence. It wasn't his usual bark, the playful one he used when chasing a ball. This was loud, sharp, and commanding, a warning. Nora shot up, her heart pounding. She glanced at the clock. 2:14 a.m., Buddy's barking continued, echoing through the apartment. Buddy, she called, her voice trembling. The German Shepherd was at the front door, his body rigid, his ears pinned forward. He barked again, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Nora's breath caught as she realized he wasn't barking at nothing. Ethan appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. Mom, what's happening? Stay here, Nora whispered, moving toward the door. Her legs felt like jelly, but Buddy's presence gave her a strange sense of courage. As she reached the door, she heard it, a faint scraping sound like someone fiddling with the lock. Her stomach dropped. Someone was trying to get in. Who's there? She called, her voice firm despite the fear bubbling inside her. Buddy growled louder, his body pressed against the door like a barrier. There was a pause, then hurried footsteps outside. A moment later, silence. Nora waited, her heart thundering in her chest. Finally, she peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Whoever it was had gone. Letting out a shaky breath, she locked the door's deadbolt and slid the chain into place. It's okay, she said, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Ethan, Buddy, or herself. Buddy stayed at the door for a few minutes longer, his ears twitching as if listening for any further threats. Then, satisfied, he turned and walked to Ethan, nuzzling his side. Was someone trying to get in? Ethan asked, his blue eyes wide with fear. Nora knelt beside him and pulled him close. It's okay now. Buddy scared them off. Ethan hugged Buddy tightly. You're so brave, Buddy. You protected us. That night, Buddy didn't sleep by Ethan's bed. Instead, he positioned himself in the hallway, halfway between Nora's room and Ethan's, his ears alert and his body ready. The next morning, as the sun streamed through the windows, Nora sat on the couch, stroking Buddy's head. You're more than just a pet, aren't you? She said softly. You're our guardian. Buddy's tail wagged slightly, and for a moment, Nora thought she saw something in his eyes, a quiet understanding, as if he knew exactly what she meant. From that day on, Nora felt a little safer. Life was still full of challenges, but with Buddy by their side, she knew they could face whatever came their way. Buddy and Ethan were becoming two halves of the same coin. Wherever Ethan went, Buddy followed. When Ethan did homework at the small kitchen table, Buddy would lie at his feet, tail wagging lazily whenever Ethan leaned down to scratch his ears. At night, Buddy curled up beside Ethan's bed, his steady breathing a comforting presence in the room. The mornings were the hardest, for Buddy, at least. When Ethan left for school, Buddy would trot to the window, his pointed ears perked up, and sit there until Ethan disappeared down the street. Even after, he stayed by the window for a while, watching as if waiting for his best friend to return. "Looks like someone misses you when you're gone," Nora teased one afternoon as Ethan threw his backpack onto the couch. Ethan grinned, dropping to his knees to hug Buddy. "I miss you too, Buddy. School's so boring without you." Nora chuckled softly, stirring the soup on the stove. She couldn't deny it. Buddy had changed things. The apartment felt warmer, filled with more laughter. But it wasn't just Ethan who had changed. Lately, Nora had started noticing small shifts in herself. She didn't feel as weighed down by loneliness anymore. The evenings didn't seem as long with Buddy nearby, nudging her hand for scratches or sitting quietly beside her as she read. And in the mornings, when she left for work, she felt a little lighter knowing Buddy was there, watching over Ethan. One evening, a minor mishap put Buddy's training to the test. Ethan had been playing in the small storage room off the hallway, pretending it was a secret fort. Nora was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when she heard a faint knocking sound. "Mom!" Ethan called, his voice muffled. She set the dish down and walked to the hallway. "Ethan, where are you?" "Here." His voice came from behind the storage room door. "I think I locked myself in." Nora tried the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. "It's okay, sweetie. The lock must have clicked shut. Let me grab the spare key." Her heart sank when she realized where the key was, in a small dish on top of the fridge, far out of her reach. "Stay calm, Ethan," she said, her mind racing. Then her eyes fell on Buddy, who was watching her closely, his ears perked up as if sensing her worry. "Buddy," she said, crouching to his level. "I need your help, boy." Buddy tilted his head, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on her. Nora pointed toward the kitchen. "Key. On the fridge. Can you get it?" It was a long shot, but something told her Buddy understood. He bounded into the kitchen, his nails clicking on the floor. Nora followed, watching as Buddy stood on his hind legs and stretched his nose toward the dish. "Good boy, Buddy. You can do it," she encouraged. With careful precision, Buddy nudged the dish, tipping it slightly until the key slid to the edge. He caught it in his mouth and trotted back to Nora, his tail wagging triumphantly. "You're amazing, Buddy," she said, taking the key from his mouth. Back at the door, Nora slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door clicked open, and Ethan burst out, throwing his arms around Buddy. "You saved me, Buddy," Ethan said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're the best dog in the whole world." Buddy barked once, his tail wagging furiously as if he knew he had done something important. That night, as Ethan drifted off to sleep with Buddy curled up beside him, Nora sat on the couch, smiling to herself. Life still wasn't perfect, money was tight, work was exhausting, but with Buddy in their lives, everything felt a little more manageable. Buddy wasn't just a pet. He was a protector, a problem solver, and, most importantly, a part of their family. The first sign of trouble was Ethan's reluctance to come home right after school. "Why are you so late today?" Nora asked one afternoon, her brow furrowed as she watched Ethan shuffle through the door. His red hoodie, once his favorite, hung loosely on his small frame, and his usual bright blue eyes seemed dull. "I stayed in the library," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Buddy patted over, wagging his tail, but Ethan only gave him a half-hearted pat before disappearing into his room. Nora watched him go, her chest tightening. Something was wrong, but Ethan wasn't talking. Over the next few days, the pieces began to fall into place. Ethan became quieter, his usual chatter about school replaced by silence. He spent less time drawing or playing with Buddy, instead retreating to his room for hours at a time. Even Buddy, with his endless patience, seemed to sense something was off. One evening, as Nora folded laundry, Ethan finally spoke. "Mom!" His voice was barely a whisper. She looked up surprised. "What is it, sweetie?" Ethan hesitated, staring at the floor. "There's this kid at school, Ryan. He says mean stuff about me. And sometimes his voice broke and he wiped at his eyes with his sleeve. Sometimes he pushes me. Nora's heart sank. Oh, Ethan, why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want to make you worry, he said, his small shoulders slumping. You're already so tired. Nora knelt beside him, pulling him into a hug. You don't ever have to keep things like this from me, okay? I'm here for you. Always. Buddy, as if sensing the moment, came over and rested his head on Ethan's lap. Ethan hugged him tightly, burying his face in Buddy's fur. As if things couldn't get worse, Nora received more bad news a few days later. I'm sorry, Nora, her manager at the cleaning company said over the phone. Business has been slow, and we're cutting hours. We'll let you know if we can bring you back full-time. Nora hung up, her hands trembling. With fewer hours, she'd barely make rent, let alone cover groceries and bills. She sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, as the weight of it all threatened to crush her. Buddy approached quietly, nudging her arm with his nose. She looked up, her hazel eyes meeting his calm, steady gaze. You always know, don't you? She whispered, running a hand over his head. What would we do without you? The tension in the apartment grew. Ethan, who had always been full of energy and laughter, was now a shadow of his former self. Nora tried everything to lift his spirits, his favorite meals, trips to the park with Buddy, but nothing seemed to work. Buddy, however, refused to give up. He followed Ethan everywhere, nudging him with his nose or dropping toys at his feet. When Ethan ignored him, Buddy would lay his head on the boy's lap, his warm brown eyes silently offering comfort. One night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Nora sat on the couch, staring out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, but she barely noticed. We'll get through this, she said softly, as if trying to convince herself. Buddy, lying at her feet, thumped his tail once in response. As she reached down to scratch behind his ears, she felt a flicker of hope. Things were hard, harder than they had been in a long time, but she wasn't facing it alone. She had Ethan and she had Buddy, and somehow they would make it through. Ethan clutched his backpack tightly as he walked home from school, his steps slower than usual. The streets were quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. He glanced behind him nervously, hoping Ryan wasn't nearby. But as he turned the corner, there he was, Ryan, flanked by two other boys, leaning casually against a street lamp. Hey, loser, Ryan called out, his voice echoing. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. Were you going so fast? Ryan smirked, stepping closer. Just home, Ethan stammered, trying to sidestep. Ryan's grin widened. Not so fast. With a quick shove, he pushed Ethan toward an abandoned construction site. The site was fenced off, its half-finished structure looming like a skeleton against the sky. Ethan stumbled inside, tripping over loose gravel. Let's see how you like it in there, Ryan jeered, his laughter cruel. The other boys joined in, their voices fading as they ran off, leaving Ethan alone. Ethan tried to steady his breathing, but his hands were shaking. He turned to leave, but his foot slipped on a pile of debris. He yelped as he slid down a slope into a narrow pit. When he hit the bottom, pain shot through his ankle. Ow, he cried, clutching his leg. He tried to stand but collapsed back down, the sharp ache making it impossible. The pit's walls were steep, the dirt crumbling every time he tried to climb. Help, he called out, his voice barely carrying in the empty sight. Tears filled his eyes as he realized no one could hear him. Back at the apartment, Buddy was restless. He paced the living room, his nails clicking on the floor. Every few minutes, he went to the door, barking sharply. Buddy, what's wrong? Nora asked, looking up from the bills she'd been struggling to organize. Buddy barked again, louder this time, and scratched at the door. His usual calm conduct was gone, replaced by an urgency that made Nora's stomach tighten. You think something's wrong? She murmured, standing up. Buddy barked once more, as if answering her question. He ran to the door and then back to her, his tail low, his body tense. Okay, Nora said, grabbing her coat. Let's go. Buddy bolted out the door the moment it opened, his nose to the ground. He led Nora down the street, past their usual route home from school. Buddy, where are you taking me? she asked, struggling to keep up. They turned a corner, and Nora's heart dropped when she saw the construction site. She'd passed it many times, always warning Ethan to stay away. Ethan, she called, panic rising. Buddy barked sharply, racing into the site. Nora followed, her eyes scanning the area. Ethan, Mom! His faint voice came from somewhere below. Nora ran toward the sound, her chest tightening as she spotted the pit. Ethan was at the bottom, clutching his ankle, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Ethan, she cried, relief and fear colliding. Mom, I can't get out, he said, his voice trembling. Buddy wasted no time. He scrambled to the edge of the pit, barking and whining as he peered down at Ethan. Nora knelt beside Buddy, her hands shaking as she assessed the situation. It's okay, sweetie. I'm here. Buddy's here. We'll get you out. She looked around, her eyes landing on a long piece of wood nearby. She grabbed it and lowered it into the pit. Can you grab this, Ethan? Ethan reached for the plank, wincing as he pulled himself up. Buddy barked encouragement, his tail wagging furiously when Ethan's hands finally appeared at the edge. With Nora's help, Ethan climbed out, collapsing into her arms. She held him tightly, tears streaming down her face. I was so scared, Ethan whispered. It's okay, Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. You're safe now. Buddy licked Ethan's face, his tail wagging in relief. As they walked home, Nora kept an arm around Ethan, her heart still racing. She glanced at Buddy, who walked proudly beside them, his job as protector once again fulfilled. That night, Nora sat on the couch, her thoughts swirling. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was their guardian angel, always in the right place at the right time. And for that, Nora was endlessly grateful. Ethan sat on the couch with Buddy at his side, his hand never leaving the dog's fur. Mom, Ethan said softly, looking up at her, Buddy's not just a dog, is he? He's something more? Nora knelt in front of them, her hazel eyes meeting her son's. You're right, Ethan. Buddy's not just a pet. He's family. Ethan nodded, his small hand reaching up to wipe away a tear. He's my best friend. Buddy, lying on the floor, let out a contented sigh as if to agree. That night, as Ethan slept soundly for the first time in weeks, Nora sat on the couch, watching Buddy. The big German Shepherd lay by Ethan's bed, his ears alert and his steady gaze fixed on the door. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. For saving him, for saving us. Buddy's tail wagged gently, his warm eyes meeting hers. In that moment, Nora felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Their lives were far from perfect. Challenges would still come, bills would still pile up, but one thing was certain. With Buddy by their side, they could face anything. And as the moonlight spilled through the window, bathing the small apartment in a soft glow, Nora realized something. Buddy wasn't just a hero. He was their miracle,